today's World Insight. As the China Development Forum 2025 wraps up, the state of trade relations between China and the U.S. amid rising trade barriers. What will it take to keep ties business as usual? Answers from the President of the National Committee of U.S.-China Relations. And a top executive of German carmaker Mercedes-Benz Group talks about China-EU ties and their decision to invest more in China.
World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The China Development Forum 2025 concluded on Monday. It's been a golden opportunity every year for the international business community to update their understanding of China, its business policies and priorities.
New growth drivers in various fields are continuously accumulating and growing, which will undoubtedly bring a sustained development impetus to the Chinese economy. This year we have set the economic growth target at around 5%. This target is based on a profound understanding of the fundamental conditions of the Chinese economy, as well as a firm confidence in our governance capabilities and future development potential. We will focus on intensifying policy efforts and combining them with the stimulation of market forces, striving to achieve the expected target set by the central government.
On the other side of the world, U.S. President Donald Trump declared April the 2nd to be the day when the U.S. will implement the so-called reciprocal tariffs that he described as seeking to equalize U.S. tariffs with those charged by trading partners, in addition to tariffs on sectors such as automobiles, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors, which he had repeatedly stated will be enacted on that day. Regarding trade relations and business interactions between China and the United States, I had an exclusive interview with Sean Stein, president of U.S.-China Business Council. He told me about how and why China and the U.S. should be more closely connected and the role of the two governments and what role the business community can play in this regard. Let's listen in. Sean, what a pleasure to see you in Beijing at CDF.
What a pleasure to be back in Beijing. And what's even better is we have so many companies here, which I think is really encouraging because it shows that despite whatever else might be happening in the relationship, the American businesses want to and need to be here. So I think this is a great time to be back.
What kind of role businesses could play and are playing right now?
Yeah, so I think what we see is we used to talk about Chinese companies, we used to talk about American companies, why are they in China? And for years they would say, we're in China for the China market. But that's just not the case so much anymore. Sure, there are companies here for the China market, but what's happened over the last 20 years is the Chinese market has matured. And so now companies are here for that, but now they're also here for supply chain. They're also here because they're doing research here. They're also here because they've got deep partnerships with Chinese companies that aren't just here, but also around the globe. And even in certain sectors, say life science. It used to be American companies would license molecules and drugs to Chinese companies. Now it's going both directions. So what I would say is companies are here for a lot of reasons. And the fact that we have so many companies here really demonstrates just how important this cooperation is. And so the companies really hope that the two governments can work out their differences in a way that leads to benefits to people everywhere on both sides of the Pacific, but also around the world. And so that's where I think they're putting their efforts is how do we help the two countries get along and how do they work more productively?
The timetable, though, is not necessarily very encouraging. If you look at April, the first so-called assessment of phase 1 and April the 2nd, the time described by some politicians as exerting more tariffs on China and other economies. So how are you and your members at the USCBC digesting this moment?
So you may remember that on January 21st, President Trump signed an executive order, and it was called the America First Trade Policy. And that America First Trade Policy wasn't just about China, it was about the entire world. And it broke out different tasks for different arms of government. But the reason why you say April 1st is because it mandates a series of reports that might result in tariffs or other types of sanctions that are all due on April 1. And then there was a second executive order on unfair trade practices and unreciprocal trade practices, and a lot of that detail is due on April 2nd. So it's absolutely true that a lot of things are coming down the pike on April 1st and April 2nd. But if you're a global company, if you're an MNC, you're worried not just about China, but you're worried about, and you're looking about how are the things going to come out for the entire world. You're worried about, what's going to happen with trade with Europe and with Mexico and with Canada, with China.
Yeah.
So I think they're looking at it in a holistic way. They're not looking at it through a uniquely China lens. They're looking at what does this mean for global competitiveness? What does this mean for how American companies are going to be able to engage with their partners, their competitors, and their stakeholders around the world. So that's the first thing, is it's not about China. Even for companies that are deeply involved here, it's about the globe. And then the second thing is I think what companies are doing is really important. And that is, many policymakers maybe haven't been working in business for a while. And so really it's been a matter of educating people in the administration, talking to people in Congress so they understand what various potential policies might mean, again, not just for U.S. business, not just for the U.S. economy, but for global competitiveness and for how the U.S. engages with the world. So I think that's the most important thing that businesses are doing, is trying to ensure that there's an understanding of the impact of potential policies on the U.S. and on the globe.
Yeah. How is USCBC trying to make that understanding happening, especially in Washington right now?
Yeah, ours is absolutely clear, right? We talk daily with people in the administration, with our companies, with members of Congress, with everyone, and that's what our role is often right now. On the one hand, is trying to make sure that myths about China business, or things that for people who haven't been here in 5 or 10 years, may not understand about China. Because if you're going to have a successful policy that's targeting China, or that's affecting China, but you don't have a fundamental understanding of what are the realities of China today, that's a policy that's not going to be successful. So whether you agree with the goals or you disagree or whatever is irrelevant. It's not going to work if you don't understand. And so that's our most important mission right now, is to help members of Congress and administration understand what the current state of China is and China's development and all of that.
Does it help?
It's helping, but all of these things take time. But what I can say is we have members of Congress that want to talk about what's really happening on the ground. We have some people in the administration that are very eager to hear from us, even though they may be committed to a certain course of action, because they think it's important to understand where is U.S. industry and where are U.S. business. So we've got great access, but all of these types of things are going to take time. The other thing that is really important is so many changes on the U.S. side, so many changes on the China side. Companies have got this critical need to understand what does it mean and what does it mean for them, and they need to know now. So we've got a lot of resources that are sort of analyzing the impact of Chinese policies or Chinese countermeasures or Chinese policy, or looking at the speech which we just saw from the premier here at CDF. It's really important for us to digest that and get it out to our members very quickly so they understand. And similarly on the U.S. side, we perform a similar role, and that is looking at new regulations and talking with regulators to make sure that companies understand what the policy is. And so I think that's the second thing that we're doing that's really important, is we're educating government, but we're also educating companies to make sure they understand the lay of the land.
Before we go, one question on two things. One is what you heard from the opening speech of Chinese Premier, talking about China's further opening up financial sector, internet, telecommunications, and biomedicine, and the list goes on. The other thing is the potential of a top leadership meeting. And what could it mean for the business community? How can you prepare for a great opportunity like that?
Yeah, so let me start with the second question.
Please.
We think that the most important thing to happen is to have the two leaders in direct contact. We think that in both countries, perhaps at the government level, there's maybe a lack of confidence, a lack of trust, and the way to bridge that is by having more leader-level contact. So we're all very supportive of getting President Trump and President Xi to talk together, to sort of see where there's room to do a deal. And there absolutely is room to do maybe a series of small deals to help build trust and confidence.
Is it happening right now? Do you think low-level discussions and talks?
So I think we've got, for example, someone in China today. Senator Daines has spoken to the president and has been talking with the Chinese government about the need for the two leaders to engage and for the need to see some sorts of action. So I don't want to get too far into his meetings, but I think that's an important signal. But on the other, for this opening ceremony, I think companies are interested in a couple of things. And I think that the first thing companies are concerned about is what's happening in the macroeconomy. The economy has not been as strong as it had been in years past, and that's affecting Chinese business, American business, European business, and everything. And so I thought there was an effective discussion about where does China think the economy is and what's it doing to help it move it forward. The second part was the reform agenda that you alluded to. What are we going to do with biotech and internet and these types of things? So this is a place where all of the things that the Premier said are incredibly important. And you would have seen, I think you were in the room, you saw people taking notes very diligently about all of those things. But here's what it actually means. And that means that companies are like, okay, that sounds good, but companies do not act based on a speech.
Right.
They don't act based upon a policy paper. They don't act based on an announcement from NDRC.
They want to see actions.
They want to see action. And so they say, okay, we think we know where action's going to go, and as soon as that action starts to happen, you'll see business respond.
That's also the focal point of the Chinese Premier's talk, isn't it? He talked about actions should be on the ground immediately.
Absolutely, and that's what we need to see, and that's what companies need to see, is those actions.
Sean, it's always a great pleasure to see you.
It's always a great pleasure to see you. I love your program and really appreciate what you've done for so many years to help people understand what's going on both sides. So really appreciate your contribution.
Thank you for your encouragement.
Thank you for your time.
Good to see you, sir.
All right, thanks.
You're watching World Insight. Still to come, Chairman of the Board of Management of Mercedes-Benz Group on China-EU ties and their decision to invest more in China. Next. Welcome back. This year marks the 50th anniversary of China-EU ties. What's next? Ola Kalenius, chairman of the board of management of Mercedes-Benz Group, believes it marks a milestone that the two sides should figure out how to cooperate even more closely and strongly for economic win-wins. During our talk on the sidelines of CDF 2025, he talked about the group's enlarged investment in China and the reasons behind it. Ola, so good to see you in Beijing.
It's good to be back.
Always wonderful to see you are back several times a year in Beijing and in China. Tell me more about your response to the latest policies encouraging domestic consumption in this country. There's a recent action plan, as you know.
Yes, I know. From the two sessions, I think that is, I think it's good news. We know that the policymakers are looking at stimulating the economy. Getting consumption to pick up pace again. We could see coming out of COVID 2 years ago that there was, let's say, some caution in consumer sentiment, and that's what we have seen in the market for the last couple of years. So if we have policies that stimulate consumers to kind of come back into the market again, that is something that we view positively.
Recently, you are doing about $1.9 billion investment in China with your Chinese business partners, trying to bring out some of the new cars with new architectures designed. Tell me more about how is it going so far with this plan?
It's all about innovation, technology, and a very, very big product offensive, but also increasing our footprint here in China. So we will launch a first vehicle in a whole new generation of vehicles this year, and we will bring it to the Shanghai Auto Show in just a few weeks' time. It is the CLA, but that car is really kind of the carrier of two brand new technology platforms. From the ground up, benchmark world-leading electric drivetrain and a fully newly developed operating system. So a holistic software stack and an operating system where the whole car can be reached over the air. And a lot of the engineering is happening here in China. We have increased our R&D footprint, built up our capabilities here in Beijing, and a couple of years ago we launched a second R&D center, also mainly for the digital side in Shanghai. So Mercedes is growing in China and is becoming more complete in China in terms of our operations.
So in China for China, it's not going to work, many say, after all these years. It's in China for the world. That's going to work.
Absolutely. It's in China and for the world. So if you look at the journey that we've gone through over the many years, in the beginning when we came here, and we have now been producing vehicles here in Beijing for the last 20 years, it was more about adapting the vehicles to the Chinese market. Now it's about original engineering. So the R&D team here in China works hand in hand with the R&D team in Germany and in the other locations around the world. And many things that we use for the world now originate from the R&D team in China.
Are they talking in the same language in terms of mechanical engineering or AI engineering? Are they talking in the same language?
Engineers always have the same language. I would say it's math, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But generally, the corporate language of Mercedes is English. We're a German company originated out of Germany.
Yeah.
But around the world, we use English.
But I know you are feeling at home, whether it's in Beijing or elsewhere in the world. 100 billion already being put into your investment in China from year 2014 to 2023, if I remember right, that number. But at the same time, we see globally, you are trying to balance between investment into innovation and investment for the future vis-a-vis cutting cost. How would you articulate these very different priorities?
The auto industry is in this fundamental once-in-a-100-year transformation. We have to reinvent the original invention of our founding fathers. So we're kind of doing two things at the same time. We're putting more money into R&D, into the tech partnerships, into our production facilities, into tooling than ever before. So the highest investment year ever will probably be this year, 2025. But at the same time, if you're an established player, a long-time, strong industrial group like Mercedes, you have to be your own venture capitalist. So you produce the cash flows that goes into the innovation, which means you have to double down on efficiency at the same time. So we're looking at simplifying organizations, improve processes, gain efficiencies. That happens so that you unlock the capital that you need to push innovation forward and be on the leading front of this transformation and the technology that you need for the future.
We see this year, China and the EU are going to celebrate a significant anniversary. In that regard, what's likely to be the role of the business community, especially now you are the head of
ASEA,
ASEA, okay.
The European Automotive Association, where all the manufacturers come together.
Yeah.
And I think this is a big milestone, 50 years of working together. And if you look at where we were 50 years ago and you compare today, our economies are very, very closely linked together. So I think we should use that as a platform to think about how do we develop this into the future? How do we create economic win-wins? It's already so connected that the auto industry, and especially global companies like Mercedes-Benz, we are in all the big economies.
Yeah.
Mercedes operates in 150 countries, but we have operations in probably more than a dozen countries. China is our biggest and most important market. So let's use this anniversary to see how can we work closer and stronger together in the future.
I'm sure you already had a plan in your heart while you are asking that question.
Absolutely. And we're investing 14 billion into new products, new technologies with partners also here in China. We're going to industrialize more vehicles also in China. And it's not just our passenger car division. We have an operation for our vans also in Fujian province. And we're in the process of introducing a complete new vehicle architecture for the vans that we will industrialize also here in China. So it is a very, very broad strategy for Mercedes-Benz in China and also China for the world.
As the head of an industry association, you will have to work with the government and also the policymakers. What do you think should be the kinds of policies they should work on right now in order to encourage the industry to grow, create jobs, while providing better growth for the economies anyway?
So business people can be thought partners to policymakers. Ultimately, the policymakers and the politicians, they make their decisions. But we can provide them with the information and we can be thought partners. And
Are they listening?
Yes, I do believe they're listening. And not only do we speak, of course, kind of in our home turf with Berlin and Brussels. When I'm here in Beijing, I also speak to policymakers here in China and do the same thing in Washington, D.C. when I'm in the United States. And what are the main topics now? It is about competitiveness. How do you create a breeding ground for entrepreneurship? How do you make your economy competitive? At the same time, it's also about decarbonization. How do you create harmony on a decarbonization strategy while maintaining a strong industry, a profitable, strong industry, creating jobs also for millions of people around the world. How do you make those things go hand in hand? And policy decisions can, of course, influence that. As you said, if the economic situation around the world is a little bit subdued, of course, economies go up and down. What can policymakers do to spur growth? You could see recently in Germany, with the new government that is incoming, they decided on a very large infrastructure package. That's an example. Or you mentioned measures here from the 2 sessions in China, where the policymakers in China said, okay, we need to do something about the consumption side. Let's get more action in that field as well. And I think the dialogue between business and politics is crucially important. And that's why carrying this role this year as the speaker of the European manufacturers is an important role that I take very seriously.
As a global manufacturer and as a global player, Mercedes-Benz knows very well. You also, as head of the industry association, knows more than anybody else about the importance of great trade. So in terms of policies on trade, including issues like tariffs, incentives, what is your take at this moment? I know you have some recent input to the media already, but I'm sure there are updated versions of the opinions from you every day.
If I look at the last 30 or so years, maybe even more than 30 years, what has created growth, what has created wealth? One of the reasons, and a very big reason, is markets opening up. And companies like Mercedes-Benz, with this global footprint, with imports and exports in all directions. Of course, we have been a company that have benefited from that. So it has created growth, prosperity, and jobs. But it's also true that you can see over the last many years that protectionism is seeping back in some economic regions and also in individual countries. And there are reasons for it. There's a lot of discussion around the level playing field and those types of things. And I think it's always legitimate to talk about a level playing field, but at the same time, we should not forget what has made us successful, what has created the growth. So specifically in the relationship between the EU and China, I have called for, but also SAE has called for, in the current trade discussion that is going on, find a solution. Let's make sure that we find something that works for both parties, because we are not going to gain from drifting apart. It's better if we come together, respect level playing field, but at the same time be pragmatic, send a signal to stability.
Especially under the current international backdrop.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have to watch and see what's going on. Some things are still unclear. There's a level of uncertainty out there. But I'm hopeful that in spite of these protectionistic trends, that policymakers don't forget what got us to this successful position in the first place.
Now, you have been a very consistent business leader, and many respect you for that, here in China and elsewhere in the world. How consistent do you see politicians and other stakeholders in the world should be, so that we can bring more momentum into the economy?
It's of course not my job to give politicians grades. And as difficult as it is to maybe run an international business in today's uncertain times, I think it's probably even more difficult to be a politician. So I don't want to second guess. What they're doing. But what I can offer is that business people like myself, and also associations like the Manufacturers Association in Europe, we can be a thought partner. We can be a sparring partner to discuss what will policies mean. What do we think will be the effect on industry? What would be policies that maybe you want to reach a goal and you find the right way to reach it, so that you, for instance, create harmony between a decarbonization path, but also economic strength. So it's those types of things where I think business and politics need to work hand in hand, but ultimately, of course, policy decisions are made by politicians.
Final question. China Development Forum this time has drawn so much attention. You have been a frequent one over there. What do you think of the emphasis that China has been putting on domestic consumption, innovation, encourage international investment, encourage win-win-win situation among business leaders and also China's economy?
I had the chance last night to meet Minister Wang from MOFCOM,
Yes.
and also today to meet Party Secretary Yin from Beijing, which is our home here, our main home here in China. And they sent a very strong message. They said, China is open for business. China is opening up. You can count on China. Invest in China, and you have a chance, if you're competitive, to get a return. I think all of those messages are encouraging. China Development Forum, every year I come here at the end of March. It is one of the premier, if not the most premier gathering of international business people around the world, where you can have in a compact format a dialogue with the policymakers in China. So it's a very, very valuable format. But the messaging that I'm hearing is China is open for business, and you have a chance to grow here. Those are things that encourage us to invest more.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of my team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now, and I'll see you tomorrow.